Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Hananaya Manpour. On behalf of the Organization of Iranian American Communities, I welcome you to our Senate briefing.
And my name is Mehdi Qaemi, and I would like to welcome the leaders of the Iranian American communities joining us from over 40 states. Let me also welcome the media, especially those who are broadcasting our event into Iran.
Our event today is very timely. It is being held shortly before the Iranian New Year, Nowruz, which begins on the first day of spring. This is also a critical time in Iran, where protests continue and various sectors of the Iranian society are utilizing every opportunity to have their voices heard in their demand for change. Meanwhile, outside Iran, the mullahs have stepped up their terrorism tactics, firing missiles, utilizing drones, and funding and training their proxies for terror operations in the region. All of this in a bid to compensate for their fundamental vulnerability vis-a-vis a defiant populace. Their isolation from the Iranian people is unprecedented. Yet the regime continues its dash to develop a nuclear weapons program, which it believes will guarantee its survival.
Beginning about 3 weeks ago, we entered a new era. The world has seen major changes impacting everything everywhere. The Ukrainian people are defending their country and their people against aggression in an unjust war imposed on them. Not surprisingly, the Iranian regime has overtly and repeatedly supported the invasion of Ukraine and has put the blame on the Ukrainian people. Also, not surprisingly, the people of Iran find themselves on the side of the Ukrainian people and their resistance in defense of their country, dignity, and their freedom. This briefing is timely because Washington and others are searching for a productive Iran policy.
Yes, and the Iranian people and their resistance have already shown us in their protests and with their slogans what the framework of a sound U.S. policy should look like. Today, we will be hearing from a bipartisan group of U.S. senators, including Senator Bob Menendez from New Jersey, Senator Jeanne Shaheen from New Hampshire, Senator Ted Cruz from Texas, Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina, Senator John Cornyn from Texas, and Senator Patrick Toomey from Pennsylvania. In addition to this impressive bipartisan lineup, we have our distinguished guest and keynote speaker from Europe, Mrs. Maryam Rajavi. She will be joined by former senior officials, Senators Joe Lieberman and Kelly Ayotte, as well as the first National Security Advisor to President Obama, General James Jones.
We will also be joined by some Ukrainian members of parliament who will tell us their stories of resistance and describe life in their war-ravaged homeland. Before we hear from our speakers, let's watch a short clip about development in Iran.
Get to know Ibrahim Raisi. Raisi was born in Mashhad, northeast Iran. He was 18 during the 1979 revolution and had no political experience. At the age of 19, he was officially selected to supervise the interrogation and torture of prisoners in Karaj, west of Tehran. He was appointed as public prosecutor of Karaj and Hamadan at the age of 20. He went on to become the deputy public prosecutor in Tehran, and in 1988 he was an active member of the Deaths Commission.
Iran in 2021 saw escalating massive protests by a population growing furious over the multitude of economic, social, and political crises created by the regime.
The statue had only been in place for less than 24 hours. It was unveiled on Wednesday morning, January 5th, and burned hours later.
So we turn to the streets of Iran to talk to activists who are risking their lives to oppose the regime and ask them what would they say to President Biden. Gunfire and tear gas wounding hundreds of protesters in Iran last weekend. For months, Iranians have taken to the streets, calling for the theocratic regime to be overthrown. And some talk to Fox News. We're not identifying the activists we spoke to, because if they are caught by the government, they could be executed.
My message to President Biden, it is that the regime of Iran does not represent the people of Iran.
While the regime is spending the wealth of the Iranian people on nuclear weapons and export of terrorism to the Middle East, what kind of life can people have where 80% of the population live under the poverty line?
ولی امروز ما همچنان افتخار میکنیم که وقتی گفتیم مرگ بر ارتجاع پاش ایستادیم همچنان که
گرد آمده ایم برای تاکید بر تعهدات بزرگ و تاریخی که بر دوش گرفته ایم. تعهد اول این است که ما مردم ایران، ما مقاومت ایران این رژیم را سرنگون می‌کنیم و ایران را پس می‌گیریم. تعهد دوم ما این است که ما مردم ایران، ما مقاومت ایران، ایران دموکراتیک و آزاد را بنا می‌کنیم. تعهد سوم ما این است که به حاکمیت و رأی جمهور مردم وفادار باشیم، نه در پی دستیابی به قدرت به هر قیمت، بلکه در پی برقراری آزادی و عدالت به هر قیمت باشیم، هرگز به دیکتاتوری شاه و شیخ برنگردیم.
Before we begin with our speakers today, I just want to take a moment to thank all of our guests here across Zoom. We have such a great crowd here today. Thank you so much for being here. And with that, allow me to invite our keynote speaker from Europe, Mrs. Maryam Rajavi, President-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. In leading the resistance against the tyrannical regime, Mrs. Rajavi is guided by her forward-looking platform for a free Iran and her vision of principled patriotism and a secular, non-nuclear republic. It is truly a privilege and honor to welcome you, Madam President.
Distinguished senators, distinguished personalities, dear friends, greetings to all of you. At the beginning of spring and the Iranian New Year, Nowruz, allow me first to pray for peace and security in the world and freedom and democracy in Iran. This conference comes as the war in Ukraine and the plight of its people have shocked the world. Iran's ruling mullahs have openly supported the invasion of Ukraine and the killing of innocent civilians. In contrast, The Iranian resistance and the people of Iran have sided with the people of Ukraine. Today, the mullah's regime is at its weakest point. Iran's economy is in a recession. Last year, there was one major anti-regime uprising every 4 months. Iranian teachers and workers held continuous nationwide protests and strikes. The Iranian people's desire for fundamental change is the cause of these protests. Khamenei and his revolutionary guards are detested and lack any legitimacy among Iranians. They continue to plunder our nation's wealth and incite war in Yemen, Iraq, and Syria. Khamenei's decision to install Raisi, the henchman of the 1988 massacre, as the regime's president is the product of the regime's vulnerable state. On January 27, the resistance units disrupted 25 regime television and radio channels and broadcast the slogan, "Death to Khamenei." This special operation destroyed 600 of the regime's radio and television servers, disrupting their programs for several weeks. Since then, the resistance units have repeatedly broadcast anti-regime slogans in busy locations in large cities, which has shocked the regime. Recently, they launched another operation destroying several sites of the Ministry of Guidance, which is responsible for censorship and fundamentalist propagandas of the mullahs. And this was another blow to this brutal and suppressive regime. The resistance units also set fire to the statue of terror mastermind Qasem Soleimani in the capital of one of Iran's provinces. The resistance units have combined the organized resistance with the social movement against the regime. Dear friends, the regime's strategy is based on 3 elements. First, brutal repression, torture, and executions. Second, making an inciting war and terrorism abroad, including in the United States and Europe. The nuclear talks in Vienna have been going on for exactly 11 months. The mullahs will never stop their bomb-making program, regardless of the result of the negotiations. On the 10th of March, Khamenei said he will not abandon the nuclear program even after the sanctions are lifted. Let me remind that the regime began expanding its nuclear program right after the July 2015 agreement and not in the last 2 years. The mullahs want a nuclear deal to have the money to pay for repression, warmongering, and completing their bomb-making program. The nuclear deal will provide the mullahs an opportunity to reinforce their position. Dear friends, on many occasions in the past 40 years, the regime was on the verge of being overthrown, but the policy of appeasement helped the regime survive and emerge as a greater regional and global threat. Today, more than ever, it is necessary that the US Senate lead a bold initiative to bring about a dramatic change in Iran policy. A principled approach is to recognize the Iranian people's struggle to overthrow the clerical regime and the fight of Iran's rebellions used against the IRGC and the repressive forces. The human rights violations in Iran should be referred to the UN Security Council. The regime's leaders must face justice for 4 decades of crimes against humanity and genocide, especially the massacre of 30,000 political prisoners in 1988 and the killing of at least 1,500 protesters in the November 2019 uprising. The following steps are necessary to prevent the clerical regime from obtaining an atomic bomb. Implement the 6 UN Security Council resolutions. Dismantle the regime's enrichment facilities and nuclear sites. And anytime, anywhere, inspections by the IAEA. Every dollar in the hands of this brutal and illegitimate regime will be used for repression, terrorism, and warmongering. The world must condemn the regime's measures to block Iran's internet and provide the Iranian people free access to the internet. Finally, I would like to express my gratitude to you, our friends and distinguished personalities who defend the just struggle of the Iranian people for freedom and democracy, which also guarantees global peace and security. I have no doubt that, as it has been proven during the last 4 decades, the Iranian people shall overcome. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Rajavi, for your insightful remarks and analysis of the situation in Iran and the best approach for the international community. Next, I am privileged to invite a dear friend of Iranian people and resistance, a true leader in the US Senate, who for last 3 decades has stood on the side of the Iranian people and their call for democracy and human rights. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome Chairman Bob Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey, Chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Menendez, please.
Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to wish you a very happy Nowruz. Holidays are a time we gather and reflect with friends and family. And as we celebrate the beginning of the Persian New Year, we are, of course, reminded of the millions of Iranians living under the tyrannical regime in Tehran. A regime that continues to stifle fundamental freedoms and oppresses its people. A regime that chooses to spend precious resources funding terrorism and destruction throughout the Middle East, instead of investing in its own people. And while the world has turned its attention to Ukraine, we cannot lose sight of the threat of the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime who remains one of the few countries to vocally back Russia's completely unprovoked and devastating invasion of Ukraine, as Russia bombs maternity hospitals and has caused more than 2 million people to flee their homes in a matter of weeks. Iran continues to stand by their Iranian partner. Just as Iran has worked hand in glove with Russia in support of the Assad regime's horrific campaign against the Syrian people for the past 10 years, it continues to stand by Putin in the face of truly horrific actions. And this partnership is paying off. Just as Iran was running out of excuses for arriving at a diplomatic solution to address its nuclear program, Russia is now leveraging its role in the talks in Vienna to again redirect attention away from the very real and immediate threat of Iran's nuclear program. Along with your community, I have been outspoken about the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran and have expressed serious concerns about the talks in Vienna to revive the deeply flawed JCPOA. It has been clear for a year, but it has become even more abundantly clear over the past few weeks that Iran is simply looking for any excuse to drag out talks while it continues to advance its dangerous nuclear program. Beyond its nuclear program, over the past year, while the talks have been ongoing, Iran has continued to show the world its true colors. It has continued to develop its ballistic missile program, making it the largest in the region, prompting CENTCOM Commander General McKenzie to state that they have reached, quote, strategic overmatch of all other regional countries. Iran has continued its attacks on U.S. personnel and assets across the region, and as I know you're aware, has even attempted to go after people like Mahish Alijinejad on American soil. And I don't need to tell anyone here about the ongoing horrific crimes the regime perpetrates against the Iranian people. Arrests, detention, no judicial process. But of course, we should have expected nothing less from Iran's new president, Ibrahim Raisi, a hardliner, crony of the supreme leader, who is already subject to U.S. human rights sanctions. With a leader who is actively involved in the forcible disappearance and extrajudicial killing of thousands of Iranian dissidents in 1988, and the brutal crackdowns against peaceful protesters in both the Green Movement of 2009 and the more recent protests of 2019. Unfortunately, we knew to expect nothing less. So as we reflect on this new year, this time of spring, we will hope for a renewal for the Iranian people. Thank you for your continued advocacy and work on behalf of freedom and democracy. Happy New Year.
Chairman Menendez, thank you so much for your remarks. Your message for the people of Iran, as well as the policymakers in Washington, is very clear. We look forward to celebrating the next Nowruz in a free Iran with you. Now I would like to introduce another senior member of the Foreign Relations Committee, an advocate of women's rights and human rights in Iran, a longtime defender of the residents of Ashraf, who continues to defend their safety and security now in Albania. Due to unexpected circumstances, the senator was not able to deliver her remarks in person, but I know she is here with us in spirit, as always. Please join me in welcoming Senator Jean Shaheen, the Democratic senator from New Hampshire, chair of the Subcommittee on Europe and Regional Security Cooperation of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Dear Mrs. Rajavi, I write today to wish you and the Organization of Iranian American Communities a happy Nowruz and thank you for your continued work in support of freedom for the people of Iran. The people of Iran know well the dedication and perseverance needed to demand change and stand up to autocracy. Since 2018, there have been 8 major uprisings in Iran involving 200 cities and hundreds of thousands of people. These protests have continued into 2022 as the people of Iran demand a better way of life. In 2021 alone, Iranians took to the streets in nationwide strikes and demonstrations of farmers, teachers, nurses, and physicians. These protesters have braved crackdowns, beatings, and detentions to make their voices heard by a government that does not want to listen. The United States supports the cause of the Iranian people to have a government which respects human rights and the sovereignty of its neighbors. This is an important time in the fight for freedom and dignity worldwide. The parallels of the decades-long struggle of the people of Iran and recent attacks on the sovereign and democratic people of Ukraine are inescapable. We are witnessing the strong resistance of the people of Ukraine against the unjust invasion of their country, a resistance that I know is well appreciated by the people of Iran who have fought for their own freedoms for years. The shared struggles between the peoples of Iran and Ukraine demonstrate the strong human desire for liberty against tyranny, dignity over oppression, and equality for all. Thank you to the Organization of Iranian American Communities and all participants in this timely briefing on human rights, democracy, and freedom in Iran. Now, more than ever, your work is vital. I look forward to continuing to work with you as we strive for universal freedoms and human rights for the Iranian people. Sincerely, Jean Shaheen, United States Senator.
Senator Shaheen, thank you so very much for your thoughtful remarks, particularly recognizing the plight of women and girls in Iran. Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to welcome our next speaker, Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, member of the Foreign Relations Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Cruz has always been outspoken about Iran for many years. Welcome, Senator, and thank you for joining our briefing today.
Hi, I'm Ted Cruz. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you as you celebrate Nowruz. Right now, the regime in Iran has made the region one of the most dangerous places on the globe. And the Biden administration, sadly, has made it even more dangerous by looking the other way as the regime busted through sanctions, restored its oil exports to over 1 million barrels a day for the first time in 3 years, and lifting terrorism sanctions on Iranian terrorists. The Biden administration allowed the Ayatollah to make dramatic progress on his nuclear program, producing enough enriched uranium to make a nuclear weapon in mere weeks. And President Joe Biden wants nothing more than to create a new nuclear agreement with the Iranian regime that is even weaker than the catastrophic 2015 deal, even if it means surrendering to both the Ayatollah and Vladimir Putin. The Biden administration wants to sanction Putin on the one hand, while simultaneously giving him a financial lifeline through an Iran deal on the other. In the Senate, I'm proud to be doing everything I can to stop that from happening. And I've made it clear to the administration that Republicans will block the terrible deal, and the next Republican president will tear up whatever's left of it on day one in 2025. The Iranian people want freedom, and they're suffering under the iron fist of the Ayatollah. But I want you to know the good news is that truth is stronger than lies, and light is stronger than darkness. So keep up the good fight for freedom and for democracy in Iran. And I hope you have a happy Nowruz.
Thank you very much, Senator Cruz. The Iranian people are very grateful for your continued support and for your continued efforts to shed light on the atrocities being committed by the criminal regime in Iran. A free Iran by the people of Iran is the only way. Thank you again. As we mentioned earlier, this briefing embodies a very strong bipartisan voice of the United States Senate. And with that, it is with great pleasure that I introduce Senator Thom Tillis, Republican Senator from North Carolina, a senior member of the Senate Armed Services Committee and co-chair of the Senate Human Rights Caucus.
Hello, I'm Thom Tillis, Senator from the great state of North Carolina. Thank you for inviting me to address the Senate briefing and celebrate Nowruz with you today. I'm proud to stand together with you as we strive for a democratic Iran. The Iranian people continue to show tremendous courage against the current oppressive regime. The new president, who was handpicked by the supreme leader, is notorious for his role in the 1988 massacre of 30,000 political prisoners in Iran based on a religious decree issued by the supreme leader against the main Iranian opposition, the MEK. With 8 major uprisings since 2018 and all 31 provinces in Iran, the Iranian people are demonstrating the weakness of the regime as well as their determination to attain liberty. I'm also encouraged by the thousands of freedom-seeking Iranians in Ashraf III in Albania, where I visited them, and their leader, Ms. Maryam Rajavi, led by a strong and dedicated woman. They continue to be a source of inspiration for the protesters in Iran who seek to end the tyranny. The American people stand with Iranians who desire freedom, and I'll do everything I can to advance your cause. The United States must keep maximum pressure on the regime and ensure they don't have the tools to continue suppressing the people of Iran, exporting terror around the globe, and developing nuclear weapons. My office stands ready to help, and we will do whatever we can to assist the Iranian people as they seek a democratic, non-nuclear Iran.
Thank you so much, Senator Tillis. The people of Iran and everyone here in Washington hear your message loud and clear. The people of Ashraf III were so grateful and delighted to have you visit them in Albania. We are now going to turn our attention to the war-torn Ukraine. We all watched President Zelensky's powerful remarks before the Congressional Joint Session this morning. Joining us from Kyiv today is a well-known member of the Ukrainian Parliament, Ms. Kira Rudik, leader of the Voice Party. Over the past several weeks, we have all watched Ms. Rudik on television as she shares the plight of the Ukrainian people with the world. Ms. Rudik, thank you for joining us at such a difficult time. We truly appreciate your being here with us today.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. And a special thanks goes to Mrs. Rahavi for the invitation. So I'm Kira Rudik, leader of the Holos Party and Ukrainian Member of Parliament. Today is the day 21 of Russia-Ukraine war. I want to remind everybody the thoughts about the day one that every single person that I have been talking to, including the honorable members of US Congress, who said, Ukraine doesn't stand a chance. You will be down in 24, maximum 48 hours. So today is day 21, and we are still standing. Watch us. Incredible bravery of Ukrainian people is showing that we can and we will be opposing to one of the largest and the most cruel armies in the world. We are doing this because we are protecting our motherland. We are protecting what is ours. We are protecting the values and the freedom, something that Russia doesn't actually understand what that is. I am right now in Kyiv, Ukraine. We are under 35-hour curfew that is done so the city can be prepared to one of the different variants of the Russian attacks. There are 3 variants, and I will tell you how we are ready to them. The first one is the direct land attack. And we have been working all together for the last 21 days to be able to get ready. We have troops that are trained. We have army inside the city. We have resistance teams as the one that I'm a member of, who are ready to bear arms and who have been training and who will be fighting Russians if they come in. The variant 2 is that they will close entrances and exits to the city and they will siege us. They will do the same thing that they have done in the peaceful city of Mariupol, where people are starving, where people are dehydrated, where people are dying right now. And we are ready to that as well here in Kyiv. We have prepared enough food, supplies, water to get ready. to be able to at least survive for 14 days if there will be a siege. And there is a third variant that is very likely and that we are not prepared for. This is if Russians will be attacking from the air, and this is what they are doing. For the last 2 days, we have been seeing the intensifying level of attacks. So what I mean is every second hour you are hearing air raid siren and you have to go to the bomb shelter and you have to hide to protect your life. And if I can, as an MP, as a leader, I can be working with my citizens to prepare for a land attack, to prepare for a siege, but I cannot prepare for the Air Force attack. There is nothing that we can do to protect ourselves from the air. There is no money in the world that we can buy ourselves the Air Force protection. And this is why we have been pleading every single NATO member, every single NATO country for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. This is what President Zelensky was asking US Congress in his address today. And we are not asking it because this is something just that we think that we need. This is a question of life or death for us. When Jens Stoltenberg said that they will be gathering on March 24th in Brussels to discuss the options that are there, you know what was my first question? How many more of my people will have to spill their blood, will have to die for us just to get to the March 24th? This is why we are asking for a no-fly zone. This is why we are asking for all kinds of Air Force protection, because this is not something that we can do ourselves. And this is why we are asking for help. This is why we are asking for your protection. During the 21 day of war, I have seen many things and I don't have time to share all of those with you. But I can tell you one thing, why we cannot make peace with Russia, why it is impossible to cut a deal with them. You know the city of Mariupol, you know it, right? A city that has been under the siege for the last 2 weeks. It's 400,000 people there right now locked without the food supplies, without the water supplies. I want you to imagine for yourself like how the life is there under the constant bombarding. And I want you to imagine mothers with their children whom they are unable to protect, who have only one idea, only one thing, to get out to safety. I want you to imagine mothers who are melting the snow to get water for their children because children are dying of dehydration. I want you to hear me loud and clear. In 21st century, in the country, in the center of Europe, there are children who are dying of dehydration because they're unable to get water. So I want you to imagine those mothers with their children early in the morning getting to the buses because they were told that there is a small peace deal that the buses can get out, that there could be a humanitarian convoy. And children hiding behind their mommy's backs and everybody getting into the buses and everybody is being very quiet and everybody being very much afraid and with the hope that they will be able to do this. And so the buses are loaded and they are trying to get out. And then the Russians start firing their guns and the buses have to come back. And the next day they're doing the same thing. They're trying to get on the buses, hoping that today would be the day. Today would be the day that they can get themselves to safety. And children are not even crying because they already know. You know what I learned about Ukrainian children right now? We are telling them to hold on to their small backpacks, pink for the girls and blue for the boys, because all the documents are there and we don't know which refugee camp they will end up at. So we are saying, please hold on to your backpack because it's very important to hold on. And they are going into the buses again. And the Russians are firing their guns again at them. And they are going back every single day, day after day, for 5 days straight, because Putin said that he will let them out and he was not able to keep his word. And this one particular small thing, fairly small thing. So how are we expecting that we will be able to cut a deal with this person? So I want to tell you that yesterday we were able to have 200 cars out of Mariupol. But not because Putin and his forces allowed us to, but because Ukrainian forces were able to take the part of the road and let people out to the safety. because the world needs to understand that there is no cutting deal with the tyrant. There is no agreeing with the tyrant. There is only one way that you do with the tyrant. You fight him. You fight him till the end. You fight him till the last person standing, because this is the only way to protect what you love, to protect your freedom. And I want today to salute to all the freedom fighters in Ukraine and all the freedom fighters in Iran and all the freedom fighters in the world, because with your support, with your protection, we will win. And we will be living in the world where one country cannot take over another country just because of the political reasons of the crazy tyrant. And we will be living in the world where children will not have to die and will not have to go through the trauma they are going in right now that is irreparable. Irreparable trauma for my nation, for the children of Ukraine. And I would like to thank all of you for all the support that my country is getting, that my people are getting. We do truly appreciate it. Every dollar, every message, every political piece of support that we are getting. We do appreciate it and we feel your shoulder. But there is one thing that we need more. One thing for us to get this chance to win this war. And you know the name of it. It is a no-fly zone. You can call it differently if it's so inconvenient, but we do need this thing. We need to protect our skies. And with that, I thank you and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rudik. What an amazing words and the conversation you had, and what an amazing solidarity and unity that this has created between our people, the Iranian people, and the Ukrainian. And we are both fighting for freedom and liberty of our nations. We are all saddened to hear the stories of death and destruction in Ukraine, but we're also inspired by the resistance of the Ukrainian people and an entire nation that is committed to freedom at all costs. Many thanks, and we understand how difficult it is for you to take time right now in that situation to come and talk with us. And I highly, highly appreciate that on behalf of the Iranian American communities throughout the United States and people in Iran who are watching this live. We will now hear another very prominent voice, Yulia Mendel, former spokesperson for President of Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky. Ms. Mendel, thank you very much for joining us today, and we are very excited to hear your remarks. Please, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. And thanks, first of all, for having Ukraine as one of the key topics today to devote time during this very important event. So I would like to focus on the story that I passed through all this time. We woke up to the sound of distant but strong explosions in the city of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. It was February 24. Just the evening before, we had attended a political meeting where a person from the government of Ukraine said that the Russians would start their invasion by morning. In 24 hours at the most, our friend showed some hesitation. For 2 days in a row, we woke up to the sound of explosions. The first day it was away. The next day, I jumped out of bed from my shallow sleep and yelled, get up, run, run. The explosions were so loud that it seemed like rockets were about to fly right through our window. My mom called me on the first day of invasion to tell she was still going to the hospital where she works as pediatrician. I wondered if it were appropriate to repeat everyday practices. I cannot do differently, she said. There are kids there. Who else should be with them? At that moment, I thought hospital would be a safe place to stay. I was so much wrong. Russians were targeting hospitals and schools in different regions. The bombing of maternity hospital in Mariupol on March 9, 2022 was the culmination of the moral collapse and societal degradation of the Russian army. 3 people were killed and 17 were wounded. A day later, an injured pregnant woman also died. What kind of a country is this that is afraid of hospitals, maternity hospitals? Russia destroys them. Were there little Bandera men, reference to nationalist hero of Ukraine there? Were pregnant women going to shoot the Russian city of Rostov? Did anyone in the maternity hospital humiliate Russian speakers? Asked Volodymyr Zelensky and has his address after this. I fled Kyiv an hour before Russians entered the city, but I stay in Ukraine doing everything possible to make the peace closer, to tell the story of Ukraine and to bring people relief. Humanitarian aid? Okay, I mean, hundreds of interviews, I don't mind. Organize the call of Elon Musk and President Zelensky, for sure. Everyone tries to do their best to help bring peace to Ukraine. But the reality in my head is tearing up. In Lviv, where I am now, it's in the west, I walked an alleyway shattered from public roads. A men's formal clothing store remained opened. Its interior was decorated with large designer skeins of thread, and two young girls were standing nearby talking about how they were still driving bad, so that they turned on their emergency lights. This was a talk from a peaceful life. Beyond this alleyway, there was another dimension where tanks ran over cars with people, where a 50-year-old Igor cuddled a cat that survived the bombing of his village by Russians. Neither his 12-year-old daughter with disabilities nor his mother-in-law, two sons-in-law, his wife's friend survived. Only two of his grandchildren survived the attack, along with his cat, Marsik. There, beyond this alleyway, I barely heard a cry of Mariupol town dying in hunger, cold, and without water. We are desperate. We trust no one. We will go to the breakthrough. We beg for help, they wrote me in a message. This is what everywhere looks like, everywhere and always. The line between life and death, the information gap, efforts to survive next to efforts to maintain a normal reality. He who has been through the school of war from the inside will never be the same. It is impossible to see the war around and to understand the explanation of Western bureaucracy and Western hesitation to close the sky above Ukraine. We don't have time anymore. When we say it needs time, it takes time, we mean it needs lives. From the first days, Ukraine begged for the closure of the sky over our land, the so-called no-fly zone. In fact, this means that NATO planes would monitor any air movements over Ukraine. And if the Ukrainian airspace is violated by Russian planes, NATO would have to react, that is, to destroy the invaders. On the other hand, this would stop the endless attacks from the sky on peaceful Ukrainians, or NATO saw it's a threat of the World War III. Vladimir Putin made it clear that he would view such assistance as Western involvement in war. And definitely he didn't want someone to interrupt his mass killings. He flexed nuclear weapons near Ukrainian borders. For me, Putin resembles a monkey with a grenade, and the West does its best not to irritate him. Closing the skies over Ukraine is obviously an irritation factor. But the monkey can drop or throw the grenade at any moment and without any irritant. Ukraine did nothing to provoke Putin's annexation of Crimea in 2014, or for the first invasion of our eastern region of Donbass the same year. And 8 years later, brazen large-scale invasion. Dictators don't need to create irritants. They make them up when they see fit, regardless of argument and logic. And I think Iran knows this very well. The West keeps trying to make sense of Putin logically calculating his next steps, but not seeing any reason to explain the current ones. Meanwhile, thousands have died, and we're just watching more dying every day. I know that the West is killing Russian economy, industry by industry, punishing the Russians for killing Ukrainians. The global order was being altered. The West woke up from the sleep to stand for democracy that is being bombed right now in Ukraine. Russia is turning into the country 404, and only outsiders can work with Russia now. I know that Iranian people know what the horrors of war now are. And when the evil rises its head, the threat is even bigger. The latest news is that Iranian foreign minister heads to Russia in an effort to remove the latest roadblock to a revived nuclear agreement. This is the threat not to Ukraine, to the whole world, right? The United States is the power that must find the instruments to stop the joint efforts to evil, to kill the world as we know it. The world is more value right now than any time. if the West doesn't help Ukraine right now, Russia will eat countries one by one. Russia has emerged over the past 2 decades as the world's leading exporter of instability. This has become a central pillar of Vladimir Putin's foreign policy, allowing Moscow to undermine potential opponents from within while enabling the Kremlin punch well above its true geopolitical weight. Russia has proven itself particularly skilled at exporting instability throughout the post-Soviet space. These are the major messages that I would like to say to you, but also we in Ukraine stand here for the 21 days. And I'm sure that we will stand to the very end, every one of us, because this is our home, this is our land, and this is our value. As Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, said that life will overcome death and the light will overcome darkness. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your very powerful remarks, Ms. Mendel. We are all moved by the stories coming out of Ukraine. And I just want to say that the strong women of Ukraine are an inspiration to women around the world. Our women in Iran and around the world stand in solidarity with you. We are now joined by another member of the Ukrainian parliament, Ms. Helena Yanchenko, an MP from Servant of the People Party and part of President Vladimir Zelensky's anti-corruption team. Ms. Yanchenko, we recognize that this is a very difficult time, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. It looks like, unfortunately, we are having some technical difficulties. So we are now going to move to Senator John Cornyn, returning to the U.S. Congress. And he is here to speak with us today. Please join me in welcoming Senator John Cornyn, Republican Senator from Texas, and member of the Select Committee on Intelligence. Senator Cornyn, welcome.
Hi, I'm Texas Senator John Cornyn. I want to begin by wishing all of you happy Persian New Year, or Nowruz Piruz, and thank you for allowing me to speak with you today. In the face of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I commend your hard work in fighting human rights abuse and totalitarianism, as well as your solidarity with the people of Ukraine. America will always stand with the people of Iran, and we will do everything we can to support your desire to be a free people. We've got our work cut out for us, but I applaud all of you and the hard work you continue to do. Thanks again for letting me join you today, and have a wonderful new year.
Thank you very much, Senator Cornyn. With your help and support, we will continue to stand with the people of Iran and their struggle for freedom. We have many members of the Iranian American community from Texas online with us today, and I can see how proud they are to hear your expression of support. Next, we are going to hear a message from Senator Patrick Toomey, Republican from Pennsylvania, ranking member of the Senate Banking, Housing, Urban Affairs Committee. Let's take a listen.
I write to wish you a joyous Nowruz celebration or Persian New Year. As a strong advocate of human rights abroad, I share common ideals with the Organization of Iranian American Communities in supporting freedom, democracy, and equality in Iran. I would like to thank the Iranian American community of Pennsylvania for the work you do to fulfill the mission of sharing your culture and heritage with our local communities, and for their support for freedom in Iran. Enjoy this wonderful celebration. Sincerely, Senator Pat Toomey.
Many thanks to Senator Toomey for his thoughtful remarks. Before we go to the next segment of our program, I would like to take a few moments to remind everyone that this event is overlapping with the coming of the Iranian New Year, Nowruz. Behind us here today, we have a half scene, the traditional display for Nowruz. Nowruz coincides with the vernal equinox, beginning on the first day of spring. In harmony with the rebirth of nature, Nowruz is the most important holiday in Iran. Nowruz comes from two words, no, which means new in Farsi, and ruz, which means day. The Hafsin table, though it has evolved over time, has maintained its symbolism. It includes 7 items starting with S, or Sin, in the Farsi alphabet. The 7 elements of life: fire, earth, water, plants, animals, and humans are all represented. We look forward to one day celebrating this important holiday in a free, secular, and non-nuclear Republic of Iran. Speaking of our rich culture and heritage, I think this is a perfect opportunity to enjoy a performance by a very talented Iranian-American musician and award-winning violinist. We are joined by Paran Amiri Nazai. Paran recently received her doctorate from UW-Madison. The piece she will be performing today was written especially for this event. Let's take a listen.
Eid Shema Mubarak, Happy Nowruz. This movement is dedicated to all the women in Iran fighting for a just and free Iran.
We are now joined by our distinguished guest, the Honorable Senator Joseph Lieberman, former senator from Connecticut and former Democratic vice presidential nominee, and of course, a leader who continues to advocate for right policy on Iran. Please join me to welcome Senator Lieberman.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to join you again for this celebration of Nowruz with an extraordinary group of participants from around America and around the world. And I want to give a special thank you to the Organization of Iranian American Communities for hosting this event, particularly the groups from Maryland and Virginia. As has been said, Nowruz brings with it all the hope and light of springtime as the cold and darkness of winter is ending. That, my friends, is the reassuring cycle of nature. But in the human world, there is not so much reassurance at this moment. The world remains darkened by brutal invasions and persecution and terrible violations of people's rights by immoral governments. This is the challenge of our time. Each of us is challenged to come together to fight the darkness of tyranny and to bring the lights of freedom and opportunity. In Ukraine, which is the focus, understandably, of global concern now, and in Iran, whose people have suffered so much for so long under a tyrannical regime. The fact is that there are remarkable similarities between the brutal Russian invasion of Ukraine in the last month and the aggression of the current Iranian government of Iran against its own people and against its neighbors for decades now. In the name of the national values of America and the civilized world, the Putin government of Russia and the Khamenei government of Iran must be stopped. These two governments are now united in a new axis of evil. And history tells us that if good people don't fight evil, evil will triumph. I do not use these three words, axis of evil, thoughtlessly. For years now, in ways that are inadequately understood, Russia and Iran have moved arm in arm for evil purposes. They partnered in Syria and supported the murderous, repressive Assad regime to stamp out the Arab Spring there, and they have brought about the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Syrians and the displacement of millions more, only because those Syrians wanted freedom and opportunity, just as the people of Ukraine and Iran yearn for freedom and opportunity. For years, Russia and Iran have conspired together to evade sanctions imposed on them for good reasons by America and much of the rest of the civilized world. And Russia has sold Iran increasingly sophisticated weapons and components for Iran's illegal nuclear weapons development program. It is therefore not surprising that when Russia invaded Ukraine, no one came more quickly and publicly to Putin's side than the leaders of the Islamic Republic of Iran. If you read the statements of Khamenei and Raisi, it is startling. Who do they blame for the troubles in Ukraine? The United States of America, the great Satan. It also is therefore not surprising that in Vienna, where the nuclear negotiations are going on, that Russia has given so much support to Iran's unjustified demands. What is surprising, I say to my friends and former colleagues in the Senate of the United States, is the extent to which the United States, Germany, England, and France have allowed the new axis of evil to succeed. If you doubt this assessment that I have just offered, let me quote the words of one of the leading Russian diplomats in Vienna who has participated in these negotiations, Ambassador Ulanov. And I quote, "Iran got much more than it could expect, much more." And then he went on to brag that there were dozens of times, when Russia and China worked together against the United States and Europe and European countries to achieve Iran's point of view on items that were in controversy. My friends, if the information coming out of Vienna is correct about the apparent agreement, this will be much worse than the JCPOA for the United States, for our allies in the region, for the people of Iran, and for the rest of the world. Now, here's what I've heard. The sunsets in the new agreement remain the same as in the JCPOA, which means that the agreement will begin to end in only a few years. A large number of sanctions that we in Congress imposed to end Iran's nuclear weapons development program will be ended without any end of that development in sight, and without any justification or logic. Apparently, many sanctions that were imposed based on Iran's support of terrorism, violations of its own people's human rights, hostage taking, and missile development will also be removed. All this means that sanctions on murderers, people with blood on their hands like Khamenei, Raisi, and for instance, the terrorists responsible for killing 241 American Marines in Beirut will be lifted. The final outrage is that sanctions apparently will also be lifted from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. This group has the blood of hundreds and perhaps thousands of Americans on its hands. Its new leader actually threatened that the IRGC is now readying itself to kill Americans in America. And oh yes, as in the JCPOA, this new agreement would release apparently about $90 billion to Iran. And as before, the government of Iran will surely use most of this money to fund terrorist proxies who will attack the United States and our allies in the Arab world and in Israel. How could an American administration sign such an agreement? For me, the answer is they should not. But if it does, we must fight it with all of our strength and with the support of allies in both parties in the United States Senate. And if they ask us, well, what is it that you offer as an alternative to this new JCPOA? Among other things, we can say we should increase the economic pressure on Iran, not decrease it, until it agrees to a new deal that will end their nuclear project, their support of terrorism, their missile development, and their hostage taking. And just as we and most of the rest of the civilized world has responded to the Russian invasion of Ukraine by supporting the brave resistance of the Ukrainian people against the Russian tyrants and the extraordinary leadership of their president, Volodymyr Zelensky, we should also support the brave and growing resistance of the courageous Iranian people and the leader of that resistance, also an extraordinary leader, one who shares the principles and values and patriotism of President Zelensky. And of course, I speak of Mrs. Maryam Rajavi. The NCRI, Mrs. Rajavi, and the MEK share our values and our interests as Americans. And that probably explains why this gathering is sponsored by a group of our fellow Americans, the Organization of Iranian American Communities. Let me close by going back to Nowruz. Our celebration of Nowruz, the coming of spring and the end of winter, should give us hopes from nature that we together can and will end the cold darkness of this time in Iran and Ukraine, and that we can together bring about a new spring of human rights and democracy for the Iranian and the Ukrainian people. That, dear friends, is my prayer today, and it is also our opportunity and responsibility. Our values as Americans, our interests as Americans call out to us to respond. Together, I am confident we shall prevail. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Senator Lieberman. As you have said, the world of 2022 is very different from the world of 2015, especially in light of the events taking place beginning in February, which have focused the world's attention on the threat that authoritarian regimes pose to all freedom-loving peoples. We are now returning to Ukraine, where we are going to hear from Mr. Pavlo Kukta, former Acting Minister of Economic Development, Trade and Agriculture, who is joining us from Ukraine. Mr. Kukta, we are delighted to hear from you. Please go ahead.
Thank you for having me, and thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you to all the organizers for dedicating so much attention to the situation here in Ukraine. I believe it concerns all the free world now, all the free peoples, including those who are fighting for the freedom of Iranian people as well. Essentially, this is a common, large war between the civilized free world and the dictatorial non-free world, in which the free people need to prevail and free all those oppressed by the tyrannical regimes that are now attacking Ukraine, because Ukraine is a focal point for this right now, starting from February. Now, I'm a very practical person who used to work many years in the government, so I'll try to give you a practical perspective on something that is hard to talk about in practical and calm terms, which is the scale of humanitarian disaster in Ukraine, the role it plays in Mr. Putin's strategy in the war that he has engaged here, and what can be done to help relieve this situation. As you know, for the past couple of weeks, essentially since the few days into the invasion, the Russian military has largely been bogged down in Ukraine. So if you look at the maps of the conflict, there have not been a lot of progress. They've not been making a lot of progress, and Ukrainian military has successfully repelled the Russians on many fronts. This has led to a certain shift in the tactics that the Russians use now against Ukraine. That is the tactics of attrition, using essentially terrorist methods. So more and more the Russians are turning to bombing civilians, killing civilians, besieging towns and depriving them of necessities. This is clearly becoming their strategy in the war in Ukraine, and essentially this humanitarian disaster is becoming the way they are trying to win this war, or at least reach some of their goals in this war. Just to imagine the scale of the disaster. About 3 million refugees have fled Ukraine in the last 3 weeks. That's 1 million people per week. Thousands of people are dead, including at least 100 children. That's the statistics available right now, but of course it's extremely unreliable. And unfortunately, most likely after the war, we'll see the numbers rise significantly. In the besieged Mariupol alone, more than 2,000 civilians have already been killed by Russians in the space of a couple of weeks. This city is totally closed off. The Russians are not letting humanitarian aid flow into the city, and it is deprived of basic necessities. People have been forced to melt snow there for water, to drink something. Children have been dying there without baby food. We know specific cases of children who died because they did not have access to baby food in this city. Other towns are also being besieged or destroyed, though Mariupol is probably the most critical situation. But the town of Chernihiv in the north, which is more than 200,000 people, is being besieged as well. The suburbs of Kiev, very prosperous and rich towns like Irpin, Bucha, or Hostomel, have been completely destroyed and their bodies lying there on the ground, right as we speak right now. This is the scale of the disaster. Fortunately, both the government of Ukraine, partner nations, or should I call them allied nations now, international organizations have all coordinated their efforts to try to relieve the situation. So almost 50,000 tons of humanitarian aid have already been delivered to Ukraine to help relieve the situation. I myself, with my team, am managing one of the largest logistical hubs for humanitarian aid right now in Ukraine. It's called I Am Not Alone. And we've processed about 10% of all humanitarian aid delivered to the country. We have flows coming into all major cities near the front line where people desperately need relief, and we see that with our own eyes. We understand how much it is needed, how much the people of Ukraine are now lacking, and how much all this is part of Mr. Putin's strategy to pressure the country into giving at least some concessions to him. He's trying to grab something, some kind of victory for himself, essentially using terrorist tactics. So this humanitarian relief effort is important both to relieve the human suffering happening right now, but also to disrupt Mr. Putin's plans for winning the war or getting something out of the war with terrorist tactics. That is, I believe, it's so crucial for us to be, as the international community, as the free world, to be successful in this. And I invite everyone to collaborate on this with our initiative, with other initiatives. Help Ukraine. You will not only relieve human suffering, you will also disrupt the plans of the Russian dictatorial government and help the free world win this war. I believe stopping Russia right now is essential, not only for Ukraine. This is not about only one country. This is the key battle for all of us, including the people of Iran. Because if Russia wins here, if the dictatorships win here, more will follow. They will continue. If they are stopped here, if Mr. Putin is thrown back and then hopefully his regime falls, this will open the door for other regimes to fall, for the nations of the world to become free. This is not a battle between two countries. This is a battle between the free world and the authoritarian world. And I believe the free world can and will win. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, Mr. Gupta. We really appreciate you making time for us during this very difficult time. We hear your powerful words loud and clear, and the people of Iran share your struggle in their fight for freedom. I am now delighted to introduce the Honorable Senator Kelly Ayotte, former senator from New Hampshire. Before her time in the Senate, she also served as the 27th Attorney General of the state of New Hampshire. Please join me in welcoming Senator Ayotte. It looks like we are experiencing some technical difficulties. I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of our guests here across Zoom. I see a very big crowd out there, and I am honored to have you all here with us. Thank you so much.
And of course, I want to take this opportunity and thank our friends and people who have joined us from Ukraine. This is a very difficult time, very dangerous for them to join us, and we can't thank you enough. And this shows once again that a unity and a solidarity that exists between nations and the people who fight dictatorial system and those who want to take away people's freedom and liberty and democracy. And as it has been proven in Iran for many, many years, particularly the last 40 some years, we are going to fight just like the Ukrainian until we achieve the freedom and democracy in Iran. And we feel this solidarity with the Ukrainian people. We are with you as you are with us, and the finish line is in very, very close, and we will overcome and we will see the victory very soon. And I also wanted to thank all of the members and the leaders of the Iranian American community throughout the United States joining us for this event, this very, very important event. Of course, it's coinciding with the Iranian New Year's and all the happiness that is to bring to the nation. We are going to see the victory very soon.
Thank you. I am being told that we have corrected some of our technical difficulties. I do apologize for the inconvenience. We are now being joined by Ms. Yanchenko. We have reconnected. Ms. Yanchenko, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Halina Yanchenko. I'm member of Ukrainian Parliament, deputy head of parliamentary majority, and mother of 2 children who are 5 and 10 years old. And my children are now Ukrainian refugees. I didn't see them in a week. And believe my story is not unique. Horrible things like that experience every second family in Ukraine. Every second family in Ukraine are now broke apart. Men went to Ukrainian army or territory defense to protect our country, our cities, and their homes. And many women with children had to actually flee away from Ukraine. Nowadays, there are over 3 million Ukrainians who became refugees and left the country to save their lives. What our country is going through is a nightmare. Bombed cities, missiles on hospitals with people in it, on kindergartens, on schools, on maternity houses where women are giving birth to their babies. Nowadays, Ukrainian women are giving birth to their babies in a bomb shells and basement. And this is something that you don't expect to actually have on European continent nowadays. Pavlo Kuchta, who just spoke a few minutes before me, told you about the situation in Mariupol. Indeed, yesterday or a day before, Deputy Mayor of Mariupol reported that there are 20,000, just listen and just try to realize this number, 20,000 of innocent civilian Ukrainians who were either killed or who died because of Russian occupation in only one city of Mariupol. 20,000 people, women, children, older people, men. They die because of shelling. They die because of they don't have access to medication because Russians have surrounded the city and don't let anything in or out to the city. Children in Mariupol are dying because of hunger and dehydration. Do you imagine that happening on European continent? Do you feel the pain of these people who nowadays are starving to death because Russians don't let any food or water in a city, in a huge city with 500,000 inhabitants in it? But Mariupol is also not a unique situation because Russians are attacking Ukraine from 3 sides. From north, and cities and settlements around Kyiv, around our capital city, are under shelling. Also, many other regions on north, south, and east of Ukraine. The pain and the stress that Ukrainians go through is hard to explain, and it's hard to even share this experience with you. People who spent even 1 week under shelling, they will feel the stress and they will need some treatment till the rest of their life. I myself, I am now in the Western Ukrainian region helping with refugees, but every noise and every sound makes a stress because I'm looking for some aviation or some air defense or something else. And this is a kind of stress that the majority of Ukrainians are going through. Well, those Ukrainians who were not killed by Russian occupants. I don't have any tears to share with you because, like, I cried for 2 weeks on a daily basis because we felt that this is an absolutely horrible situation that no one should go through and no one should experience. But I don't have any like emotions or tears to share because like I'm out of it. And as Pavlo Kuchta said, this is a war. This is not a war between Russia and Ukraine. This is a war between tyranny and dictatorship and free world. We are fighting with a country who hates not only Ukraine. We are fighting with politicians and army who hates not only Ukraine, but which hates its own citizens. We are fighting with Russian who throw journalists in a jail for calling a war a war. Do you imagine this level of censorship? Do you imagine this level of censorship? We are fighting with a country which beats its own citizens who go on protest. So we are fighting basically with Russia, who became a North Korea. But the reaction of Western world is not adequate, in my opinion. Of course, we are thankful for all the help and all the assistance we are getting, but it comes quite often, it's slow and it's not sufficient. And on a daily basis, well, on an hourly basis, hundreds of innocent Ukrainians are dying. Just an hour ago, I received this picture, and this is the picture of I don't know, 3 or 4 year old child who was shot by Russian troops when this child was trying to escape the village near Zaporizhia. Russian occupants just started to shoot at the column with people. And that's what they are doing in a number of cases when Ukrainian government is trying to evacuate peaceful citizens from the cities, from the shellings and stuff like that. I will find it later and I will share it with you. So basically, what we are seeing now is that quite a strong Ukrainian army, brave people who are fighting back with Russians, and these people will not surrender. They will not leave the country or escape. They will fight till the very end. And Western world can help Ukrainians to actually make this victory sooner. You can help with weapon and with air defense. You see that Ukrainian cities are being shelled heavily from air. Citizens, innocent civilians are suffering. And I think if West really shares such values as human life, human dignity, as rule of law, you should act immediately and you should not wait. I know the Western bureaucracy, but actually it's not a time to play with bureaucracy. It's not a time to play with negotiations. It's not a time to play let's think what we can do in a week. It's time to act right now, because on hourly basis, Ukrainians are being killed by Russian occupation troops. After all, you also should work with transnational and international companies who keep working in Russia, because those private companies keep funding Russian government, keep funding Russian troops, and it means that they keep funding deaths of innocent civilians in Ukraine. This is probably the main thing that I wanted to share, but the very last point that I want to stress my attention is is the fact that Putin is doing all these horrible things in Ukraine because he sees fear. He sees fear in the eyes of Western leaders. He understands that Western political leaders are afraid to react. He sees fear and he understands that he will not be punished in a short period of time. The sanctions that are imposed is not enough if Putin and Russian army keeps killing Ukrainians. So I beg you to be strong, to be brave, and to take actions on time. If you show Putin that you have this fear, he will go on. And he will go on killing not only Ukrainians, but he will go on invading in other countries. We've already seen that Russia is acting as like a country, aggressive country. They have started with Moldova, they continued in Georgia, and being unpunished, they actually are having this war in Ukraine. Again, starting in 2014, and because they were not punished enough, they continued this full-fledged aggression, this full-fledged war, killing thousands of Ukrainians, like in the majority of region of Ukraine. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yurchenko. Thank you very much for being here with us today. We are moved by your powerful message. We recognize that this is a very difficult time, and we thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. And trust me, you are, the Ukrainian people are the talk of the town. More and more people are demanding from their leaders for more support, and the whole world is watching and supporting your resistance, and we shall overcome. I am now delighted to introduce the Honorable Senator Kelly Ayotte, former senator from New Hampshire. Before her time in the Senate, she also served as the 27th Attorney General of the state of New Hampshire. Please join me in welcoming Senator Ayotte.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be with all of you today. Let me join others in wishing you a happy new year, happy Nowruz. This is an important year, and it is my hope that this year, finally, the Iranian people will have peace, prosperity, and freedom. But that's only going to happen if the regime of Raisi and the mullahs is ended. And when we think about the fight for freedom, we have heard about that fight today, the one that is happening in Ukraine, the brave Ukrainians who are fighting to defend their land. And we understand and we know that Mrs. Rajavi and the MEK, they know how important it is to fight for freedom. We stand with the people of Ukraine, and we stand with the people of Iran who are fighting for their freedom. As you look at the fight that's happening in Ukraine, we heard today from the strong women leaders who have served and continue to serve in the Ukrainian parliament. We just heard from a very powerful speaker about what is happening in Ukraine. Women in Ukraine are picking up arms and defending their nation. They are leading the fight in Ukraine, just like women in Iran are leading the resistance against the mullahs and the oppressive regime that are harming the people of Iran. Mrs. Rajavi has offered her support to the women of Ukraine and to all people of Ukraine. And Mrs. Rajavi stands with the people of Ukraine. In contrast, Raisi was one of the first leaders to actually speak with Putin and offer his support for the invasion of Ukraine. Khamenei had the audacity to blame the United States of America and NATO for what is happening in Ukraine. The Iranian regime supports the invasion of a sovereign nation because they do not believe in freedom. They oppress and torture their own people. And yet, in defiance of the Iranian government, Iranians bravely held a protest outside the Ukrainian embassy in Tehran and shouted, "Death to Putin," just as brave Iranians have took to the streets and shouted, "Death to Khomeini." Showing the Iranians have shown their solidarity with the people of Ukraine, and they've done so bravely. So many Iranians stand with Ukraine because they know what it is like to be ruled by ruthless leaders who do not support their interests and to deny them basic human rights. This is especially true for women. Women in Iran are treated like second-class citizens. They do not have the same rights as men, and we know that that is wrong. And as we celebrate Women's History Month, it is important to recognize that the movement for freedom in Iran is being led by a strong, capable woman, Madam Rajavi. Mrs. Rajavi, the president-elect of the NCRI, offers a strong alternative to the oppression we now see in Iran. The NCRI's 10-point plan envisions a peaceful, democratic future for Iran, one that protects the people's human rights and one that ensures that Iran is not a nuclear state. It is important that the United States stay strong and stand strong with the people of Iran on a bipartisan basis. I was heartened to hear from the senators on both sides of the aisle today talk about how important it is that we stand with the people of Iran and that we ensure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. Unfortunately, this regime tortures and kills its own people. It promotes terrorism around the world. It fuels proxy wars in the Middle East. It supports the murderous Assad regime and funds terrorist groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. And we know also, according to a recent report issued by the Director of National Intelligence, that the regime is actually daring to try to harm people on American soil. In fact, Secretary Pompeo has to have a security detail around the clock that taxpayers are paying for because the Iranians are threatening his life even now. Finally, just days ago, the Revolutionary Guard dropped ballistic missiles on Iraq near a US facility. Despite all of this malign behavior, unfortunately, the Biden administration is trying to negotiate an agreement right now in Vienna with Iran. The problem is this: you cannot trust the regime. They lie, they cheat, and they kill. We should not appease them. Just like we cannot appease Vladimir Putin, and we should stand with the people of Ukraine, we should not appease the Iranian regime, Raisi, Khomeini, the mullahs. We cannot trust them. They have the blood of Iranians and people around the world on their hands. No deal is acceptable unless it verifiably ends Iran's nuclear program and stops all enrichment of any uranium, ends their ballistic missile program, stops their support of terrorism, and very importantly, Iran must also agree to respect the basic human rights of the Iranian people. The original Iran deal was weak, and I was proud to vote against it. We cannot afford to negotiate another weak deal with this murderous regime. We also should not allow Iran to re-enter the international oil market. Why would we turn to Iran for oil when we can develop our own natural resources and even turn to Canada for help? And most of all, we should reject Russia's efforts to shape the deal to allow Russia to do business with Iran despite international sanctions. It would defy all logic to allow Putin to dictate any terms in a nuclear agreement. Putin, Khomeini, Raisi, they are all cut from the same cloth. We should not deal with these thugs. The free world should isolate these evil men and make them pay for their crimes against humanity. It is my hope that this will be a new year for the people of Iran, and that this Nowruz, we can all come together and celebrate freedom for the people of Iran. We support Mrs. Rajavi and what she is trying to do. We stand with the people of Iran who bravely protest in the streets, just like we stand with the brave Ukrainians who are fighting for their homeland right now.
Thank you so much for your uplifting words, Senator, and thank you for always taking the time to highlight Mrs. Rajavi's 10-point plan. As you have said, it is a plan that envisions a peaceful, democratic future for the people of Iran. Thank you again. We are now returning to Ukraine once again, where we will be hearing live from Ms. Lisa Yashko, member of the Ukrainian delegation in Council of Europe. Ms. Yashko, I understand that you are joining us while actively on the move, and we may experience some in and out with the audio. Thank you for being with us here today. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. I'm now driving from Strasbourg back to Ukraine. And I would like to start to thanking, of course, Mrs. Rajavi for organizing this and for supporting. It's very important when we Ukrainians feel the support and solidarity from different societies and nations who struggle and are in resistance, fighting for freedom and for values that are very important. For me, personally, my life has changed considerably 3 weeks ago when we all in a country woke up when the war has started. But unfortunately, my life has been a real horror also because someone who is very close to me, the former president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili, and Ukrainian citizen, was arrested as a Putin personal hostage in October last year. So it seems that Putin is taking my family away, my home away, and wants to take my country away. It's incredibly painful and it's incredibly hard. But we are not right now in counseling session. We are in resistance, in incredible fight for our values and for our freedom. And I know that Ukrainians, more than anyone probably right now, any nation in the world, we are in very, very hard fighting mood, because we know that if we don't fight, we may not exist anymore. And this fight is not only for us, for the future of Ukraine, but also for the future of the whole humanity and for all nations that are fighting. We need to be an example of that resistance, of that ability to defend our ideas, our beliefs, our identity, and also to say no to real evil. The things that are happening right now, and including, unfortunately, that a ballistic rocket that recently happened coming from the Iranian side, and from other places in the world where we cannot trust the governments. It's a very dangerous moment in history. But I'm sure that if we have this solidarity all together, we share this pain, but we continue going forward to the future and to that freedom that we all deserve. Sometimes some societies and some nations need to fight to prove a right for existence. It's incredibly painful because I think that everyone deserves to be happy. And in my country, we already went through a number of revolutions. And we already had war in 2014, the aggression that started. And now it's a full-scale war that we are not hiding from. We take this challenge and we go till the victory. As my colleagues said before, Ukrainian colleagues, we all are devastated by the number of victims that we see every day. And it's incredibly painful to see that people, ordinary people, civilians are suffering, and children But what I want to ask all of you who is listening to me right now is to say, first, don't give up if you are fighting for your societies, for your states, and for politicians. I want to say, please, let's be not only brave, but let's feel that moment of the history when we finally are choosing which page of that history we will have tomorrow. We may have a bad choice, right now, or we may miss the moment when we will be able to make a good choice for peace. And then some countries maybe just get destroyed if we don't act today. So I'm asking, please, let's in solidarity with each other, with understanding the historical role that we are all playing, all as nations and as the states and the government. Now it's the moment finally to start a new page in the history where we won't have hypocrisy anymore. We won't have cynicism, evil, aggression. And I'm dreaming about the governments in the different states where we really could have transparency, we could have freedom, and we could trust them. And I know that Ukraine is an example of such a state right now. And I'm sure that with your support, we can not only make a change in Ukraine and defend Ukraine, we will, without exaggerating, I'm sure that now we are fighting for the whole world, for the whole new world, and it's opportunity for every one of us. Thank you very much, and I wish peace and freedom to all of you, and also to our hearts, minds, and souls. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yoshko. Your remarks are heard by freedom-loving people around the world. And as we stand with you in your fight for freedom, we will not give up. We have chosen, just like you said, to be on the right side of the history, to be with the Ukrainian people, to do everything we can to take your message to the millions of people. And I can tell you that there is a lot of solidarity and a lot of support here in the United States, and it will continue, and we shall overcome. And please be safe. We understand it's very difficult for you to take the moment to join us today. Our next and final speaker is the first National Security Advisor to President Obama, a retired four-star general, Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, and a Marine Corps Commandant. Someone we all know who has advocated for Ashraf III in Albania. Please welcome General James Jones.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Jones. I'm a retired Marine General, a former National Security Advisor, and a passionate fan of the NCRI and everything that wonderful organization has stood for many, many years. I am especially a fan of Mrs. Rajavi, who has led with great courage and distinction on the path of democracy for the future of Iran. My relationship with NCRI goes back to 2010 when I left the White House as National Security Advisor, and I became aware of the plight of the people at Camp Ashraf I, where they had been living for many years, and where the American military had provided and promised safety and security for the people in return for laying down their arms. We all know that when the United States pulled out of Iraq, that the Iraqi regime under then Prime Minister Maliki did not live up to the agreement of safeguarding and protecting the people of Camp Ashraf, and cooperated with the Iranian regime to systematically attempt to exterminate those people by a series of unprovoked attacks against a camp that was unarmed. Subsequently, the people of Camp Ashraf, or what we now call Ashraf 1, were moved to Ashraf 2, which was formerly known as Camp Liberty. It's a good thing that we call it Ashraf 2 because Camp Liberty was anything but. And despite promises made by high-level U.S. government officials, the safety and security of the people of Ashraf 2 was again called into question with a series of attacks, kidnappings, and brutalities that we see displayed in Ukraine today by Russian forces. Ultimately, the Ashraf 2 people were moved to Ashraf 3, where they currently lived in Albania. Albania deserves a lot of credit for stepping up to the task of welcoming and providing a home for the people of Ashraf. And I visited there, not nearly for a longer period as I'd like to, and I intend to visit there again this year. But we're grateful to the government of Albania for their hospitality. What's going on in the world right now, and it seized the world's attention in Ukraine, is the Russian onslaught. The people of Ukraine have showed themselves to be not only good fighters, but very resilient, and have, I'm sure, frustrated the idea that Russia would achieve its goals within 3 days of the beginning of hostilities. That hasn't happened. And one can only hope that the freedom fighters of the Ukraine will prevail with the help of the watching world against this unprovoked attack, which is bent on replacing the government and, if need be, destroying the fundamental aspects of the Ukrainian culture and political life. It's what's going on in Ukraine is reminiscent of the struggle that the NCRI and the previously known as the MEK, of course, have carried on valiantly in and outside of Iran. We have not seen anything like what's going on in Ukraine since World War II. But the resistance movement in Iran is well familiar with the sacrifices that have to be made and the number of lives that have been lost and forever altered as a result of their struggle for freedom. So in a way, the two struggles are about freedom and democracy, things that we stand for here in the United States, and that democracies all over the world should join hands and support. My only disappointment today is the fact that the Iranian regime is still in power, but I take great solace in the fact that the stranglehold that they once had on the Iranian people is diminishing. I think the regime in Iran is in trouble, particularly since the 2018 uprising. I think Russia itself will have internal problems, big internal problems that will grow as the people of Russia, who also like freedom, understand that their government has lied to them, withheld information. But as the casualties grow and the body bags return home, even an authoritarian regime like Vladimir Putin's will not be able to hide the truth for much longer. And there is evidence in Iran that the government will not be able to control the manifestation of public outrage in their quest for freedom. On January 2nd of this year, a Soleimani statue was destroyed almost as soon as it was put up. On the 27th of January, 27 nationally owned television channels in Iran were disrupted for 12 seconds. And things like pictures of Mrs. Rajavi were shown on the television before they could figure out how to block that. There was a hack today or yesterday in Iran in the Ministry of Censorship. There was an audio hack in the big shopping centers that lasted for 1 hour with messages of freedom and encouragement from NCRI. Those are manifestations of tremendous public outcry for change in Iran. And we're seeing the same thing with the freedom fighters in Ukraine. Both groups deserve the support of all functional democracies and people all over the world who sometimes take the freedoms that we enjoy for granted. But we should never forget that the cause of freedom is never over, that it's not free. It's something you have to work for, because unfortunately, in the world today, we have authoritarian regimes and dictatorships that are bent on consolidating power, and they don't care about things like human rights and human privileges and human dignity. We can make a change there with the support of the Congress of the United States and the administration. We can, in fact, make sure that change does come, and it comes sooner rather than later, both in Iran and in Ukraine and any other country that suffers under the yoke of a brutal dictatorship. What's going on in the world today is important. It's important because how this ends in Ukraine and how this ends in Iran, with the successes that we hope, but sends a message to other dictators that their time is limited, that they cannot continue to persecute their population for their own advantage, and that if in fact the current leaders of Iran and Russia are made to be the pariahs that they deserve to be, the war criminals that they deserve to be labeled, then, and we enforce that idea that they're not welcome in any of our freedom-loving countries, then I think we can make sure that the other dictators that are watching and might be inspired by the actions in Iran or in the Ukraine will think twice about how they proceed in the future. And that's a lofty goal. It's an admirable goal. It's one that we should all participate in. And I'm very proud to be with you today. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but I can assure you that I will be there until this is resolved in Iran, which means the replacement of a regime with the democratic values that Mrs. Rajavi has listed in her 10 principles. And in Moscow, where Vladimir Putin will be the pariah that he is in the process of making himself to be. So thank you very much for listening to me, and God bless the people of Iran. God bless the freedom fighters in Ukraine, and let's press on and bring victory to in both instances. It's well worth it, and it's very important for the future of the planet. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your insightful remarks, General Jones. We hear you and cannot agree with you more that the Iranian regime is weaker and more vulnerable now than it has ever been before. As you have said, better days are coming for Iran and coming very soon. Thank you so much, sir. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank all of our guests joining us on Zoom once again. I see faces represented from all across the country, friends and members of the Iranian American community here from New Jersey, California, Florida, all over.
God, Colorado, Nevada, Tennessee, Arizona, North Carolina, South Carolina. What an amazing, amazing, powerful exhibition. Truly, one can say that wherever there is an Iranian American, the voice of Iranian resistance and the platform of 10-point plan of Mrs. Rajavi for a free, democratic, and a Republic of Iran is heard loud and clear.
Indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, the bipartisan voice of the U.S. Senate has spoken today. We have also heard from Mrs. Maryam Rajavi, representing the voice of the Ukrainian people, as well as Ukrainian dignitaries and members of parliament who spoke very powerfully and made clear that they will resist until they have achieved victory against tyranny, a struggle that the Iranian people are all too familiar with. It is clear that the U.S. focus on Iran policy must go beyond the narrow scope of the JCPOA. As we all know, the Iranian regime continues its defiance, its rocket attacks, and its hostage diplomacy in a bid to lift the sanctions, which are hurting the ruling apparatus and the IRGC.
Members of the U.S. Senate reiterated in a bipartisan way that there is a rising consensus to deal with the other malign behavior of the Iranian regime. This includes the Iranian regime ballistic missiles program, the regional meddling state-sponsored terrorism around the globe, and its human rights violation inside Iran. Everyone here today has expressed their support for a free, secular, non-nuclear Republic of Iran. As we conclude our program today, I would like to thank all of you guys, for joining us. And until the next time, have a wonderful day.